of course, our main function right here does pretty simple thing. It constructs the window. Okay, so basically constructs the instance of the window and calls the show function for our window. So let's take a look at the implementation of show and locate it. So here it is. So when we invoke show, so we attach the window closing callback, and then for each of the buttons, line, circle, and rectangle, we invoke callback for these three widgets, and we pass the same function address to this to every single widget right here. However, when we pass user data to these callbacks, remember that the callback allows us to specify a user parameter, and this user parameter will be three instances of radio selectors that we instantiate, basically create them as new, and pass the pointer to the main window, which of course will be stored right here in the in this pointer. And then each single one of them gets the unique enumerated identifier that we also created in our header file. So this way, what happens is that when we use our main function and it creates instance of this main window, okay, so main window of course derives from fluid window. Fluid window will construct first, and will be constructed first, and there we have three of our controls, three widgets that are also constructed. More specifically, three pointers to objects. So for each single one of them, there will be full-text library object created that represents the widget, right? So we have three pointers in our fluid window class right here that that are going to store addresses of the three of these widgets, so that we have three of these widgets. And when we call and then of course the main window constructor finishes and wraps itself around the fluid window. So that's in memory. Basically the fluid window object is contained inside the main window object, which is constructed by our main function. Okay, so then when we call show for our main window, which is this big box, so for this big box we call show window, and we tell each single one of these widgets or radio buttons that we want to invoke the same callback radio button static function. So I'll just draw it somewhere here. So this is our static function. Okay, so we say that let's remember to call this function, and each single one of them will be calling this function whenever the user clicks on them. And so is this one. So they're all pointing to the same callback. They all will be generating the same callback. However, in addition to this, what we also specify are user data, and this is the new radio selector each time. So we also tell each of these widgets that they should also remember dynamically generated radio selector, which is another object, right? So this is our radio selector right here, and each single one of them gets such radio selector. So when this call is made, our callback radio button will receive the user data, right? So there will be an input parameter right here to this function, which is this callback radio radio button. So when it'll be invoked, basically it will receive a pointer to the radio selector, right? So this is radio selector, and radio selector in its own self does have a pointer back to the main window. So there's lots of pointer connections between all of these objects. Okay, so but we can actually probably step through a single click on a button just to trace through every step that is happening when we're going through implementing the handler for each click. So let's take a look at this. All right, so let's just perhaps start a debugging session. I think this is pretty simple. It's just setting everything up. But then here is this callback radio button callback, which is a static callback, right? So this is callback, static callback. So this is what the widget calls. And it passes this user data, but this user data is actually an instance or pointer to this class. And so we cast this to the radio selector. So now we have the selector. So now we have a pointer to this, and it has the window and button ID. And it just then delegates everything to the selector select call. Okay, so then this select call is invoked, and the select call grabs the window pointer and invokes click radio button and passes the button ID as a parameter. Okay, so now we're jumping back into the window, and this is now inside main window. We have click radio button, and it has radio button ID, and we switch on this ID, and we recover the fact that this is the radio button line, circle, and rectangle. You see that there is really not much implementation. It's just basically the cases. The three cases are provided, but they're doing nothing. In this initial state, we just simply display the button ID on the console window. That's all we do. So let's trace through this, and let's set a breakpoint right here. Right, so right here, when somebody clicks one of the radio buttons, this function is invoked, and everything begins from here. So I'm going to start my debugging session. Okay, and so we have our application that has started, and let's start with the line. So we click this line, and of course we're now inside the callback, and we instantly stop here. So this is our user data, which is pointing to some memory, but this memory, this pointer, is actually a pointer to the radio selector, right? So it's a pointer to one of these radio selector objects, and we immediately take this user data. Okay, so we step over this, and now we have pointer to our selector. So we can see that the selector is an object, as shown by this little icon in this locals view. And here we have button ID, which is 0. So button ID 0 corresponds, of course, to the line which I tried to click. Okay, and then the window, of course, pointing to our window class, and we're just about to call select. So we're going to press another F10. Oh, I'm sorry, I just stepped over this. I did not step into this. Let's repeat this. I press F5 to do the same thing. I'm just doing the same click on a different widget. So this time, step over this. Selector button ID is now 1 because I clicked on a circle radio button. And now I press F11 to step into select, but now I am already inside the selector helper class. And of course we delegate everything to, now we have our button ID, which is 1. And again I press F11, and there inside our window we have the actual handler that can do something useful. So all the payload is going to be located in these switch cases. You can use if-else statement if you like, but since this is just one integer controlling this selection, it's a good situation to use the switch statement, just to switch between these three cases and do something useful here. So we really just keep it as a empty handler, but the important thing is that it gets invoked. So if I press F10 to step through this, and switch takes me, of course, to the circle selection. And from here we can just press F5 to continue debugging, right? So continue debugging, we can press F5, and yeah, so we make our selection. And of course, if you see what's happening in the console window, of course things are being printed in the console window.